Well, welcome to this video in the series on the Tiger Tank. My name is Bruce Oliver Newsome, and these are the lectures on the Tiger Tank. And in this lecture, we're going to look at Soviet discovery of the Tiger Tank and the shockingly dysfunctional relations between the Soviets and their allies about intelligence on the Tiger Tank, and how some of these confusions and misestimations got into their history books. So this story goes from the First World War to the Second World War, and you're going to see extremes in relations between the Soviets and the Germans. Sometimes they are the greatest of enemies, and sometimes the most intimate of allies, including intimate cooperation on tank technologies. In the First World War, they start out as enemies. Now, Imperial Russia is at war with Imperial Germany and Germany's allies in the Central Powers until late 1917, when Russia collapses economically and then politically. And at central government in Moscow, it's the Bolsheviks who seem to have the upper hand, and it's with them that the Germans negotiate. And they eventually reach a peace settlement in March of 1918. So that ends the war on this front, and the Soviets of the Bolsheviks become, the Soviets renounce Imperial Russian claims to the territories between Russia and Germany, and they agree to withdraw from these territories, which make up most of Ukraine in the south, then Belarus, and then the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Finland in the north. And some of these states become independent or autonomous, but they all continue to take German occupation troops. And the Bolsheviks do this because they want to focus their war against the competing Russian parties in the Civil War. And they also are effectively at war with the Western allies, who have intervened in the port cities where they had been supplying the former Imperial Russian military with arms and equipment. So the Western allies are in the port city of Archangel in the northwest. They're at the end of the Trans-Siberian Railroad from Moscow to Vladivostok in the southeast. And more latterly, they're in the Caucasus in support of anti-Bolshevik forces there. And that civil war is going to ebb and flow for a few years. Now, meanwhile, on Germany's Western Front, its war collapses, and in November of 1918, it reaches an armistice with the Western allies. And in June of 1919, the Western powers and Germany reach a settlement which drastically reduces Germany's borders, both east and west. So it loses territory to Poland and Czechoslovakia in the east, and that's going to impact the Russian Civil War. The Russian Civil War expands, taking in Poland and Lithuania and other neighbors, and the Allied interventions continue, particularly in the south, in support of anti-Bolshevik forces there. So for the Soviets, from 1919 to 1920, their focus is the Poles, though there is this newly expanded, very large state of Poland once it's taken territory from Germany. And this war ebbs and flows in dramatic ways, but eventually the Poles have the upper hand, partly because they have better use of armored vehicles. That's the latter situation that the allies, Western allies' intervention in the south and north also benefits from, is British, French tanks. So the Poles have the upper hand in this war, and they eventually agree a settlement in March of 1921 where the Soviets concede more territory to this new state of Poland. They also hand over financial compensation and industrial and railway materials. So after that settlement with Poland, you've got this large state, new state of Poland, which has a corridor between Germany's west and then East Prussia, where the capital is Königsberg, and then the Baltic states, and then Russia has its new border running between Pskov and Minsk down to the Ukraine. Now, Soviet Union, this new Soviet Union is not recognized by most Western states, and Germany is an isolated and disrespected power. So these two states naturally have interests, self-interests in cooperating with each other since they have so few other states to cooperate with. So in May of 1921, which is just a few months after the settlement between the Poles and the Soviets, Germany, which has its own problems with the Poles, so there is an ongoing border conflict between Germany and Poland, Germany agrees to recognize the Soviet Union. And then in April of 1922, the two sides agree a treaty where they will normalize their diplomatic relations, and they also agree to economic cooperation. And they go on in July to reach a secret agreement where they agree to trade German military products and services in return for German use of Soviet military facilities. Now, go forward a bit to December 1926. Germany and the Soviet Union, they agree to form a shared tank school in Russia. Now, it has to be in Russia because Germany is banned by the Versailles Peace Treaty from having tanks at all, although it is already developing its own tanks. So it needs this foreign site in order to test and train with tanks. So it eventually gets an operational shared tank school at Kazan from 1929 to 1933. And during those 4 years, it gets to test its secret tanks. So one of them is the light tractor, codenamed Light Tractor. That is tested at Kazan. And more significantly, their Gross tractor, so their large tractor, is also tested at Kazan. So the Russians are the only foreigners to be aware that the Germans are already developing heavy tanks. The Western Allies actually remain ignorant of the Gross tractor until the Second World War. Now in 1933, the Nazis come into power and they cut short that cooperation with the Soviets, so they are ideologically antagonistic to the Soviets until the summer of 1939, when they negotiate a pact with the Soviets to cooperatively invade and occupy and annex Poland. So Germany is going to take most of the western side of Poland, and Soviets will have the eastern side. So they are co-belligerent. They're not exactly on the same front, but they will have the opportunity to look at each other's weapons when they come and meet in the middle at their demarcation line. And also they're going to have a sort of victory parade where they get to look at each other's tanks. Now the latest tanks in that war are the BT-7 medium tank on the Soviet side. The BT series has not been hidden by the Soviets. It's actually been publicized quite extensively, and some Western liaisons have been invited to see BT tanks in action before in previous years. The BT-7 is the latest iteration, and the Germans are fairly impressed by that. The latest German tank to be used in the Polish War is the Panzer IV-C. Now Germany pushes an even stronger relationship. After that cooperative occupation of Poland, Germany wants an even tighter relationship. So Germany trades intelligence with the Soviets and commodities and even arms, and the Soviets reciprocate. Germany is pushing it more, but the Soviets are reciprocating this relationship. So the Germans go so far as to trade a Panzer IV-D. They actually supply a Panzer IV-D to the Soviets for the Soviets to evaluate. And then Adolf Hitler personally, he invites a Soviet military mission to come to Germany and to look around German tank factories and tank maneuver areas. And Adolf Hitler actually instructs his principals to give the Soviets full access. Now the Soviets get to see the Panzer IV-D, the latest German tank. It's being built at this time. They see it in the factories and they see it in training. But they are skeptical that this is the latest German tank. The Germans have not admitted that they are developing other tanks, and those other tank programs include Tiger programs. So the Germans are not sharing what is developmental, but they are sharing, they're genuinely being truthful when they say the Panzer IV-D is the latest tank that they actually have on issue. And the Soviets are skeptical about this, and they keep reminding the Germans that Adolf Hitler has instructed them to give them full access. And the Germans rightly conclude from this, well, the Soviets must have better tanks already for them to be so skeptical that the Panzer IV-D is the best that the Germans can show. So we go on to June of 1941. Germany and its allies in the Axis, they invade the Soviet Union. And it's this point when they get to fight the latest Soviet medium tank, which is the T-34. It's a development of the BT series, but it's a much larger one and a much more capable one. The Germans are ignorant about this tank until they end up fighting it in the latter days of June 1941. And at the same time, they discover the latest Soviet heavy tank, the KV-1, of which they are also ignorant until they get to fight it. To continue watching the whole video, go to patreon.com/Bruce Oliver Newsome.